living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Upset stomach, sweaty palms, rapid heartbeat, and muscle tension. Sometimes we know exactly how stress affects our body, but depending on how you manage stress, you may have overall negative health effects that you're not knowing about. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Lisa Sather. Stay tuned. We're going to talk more about stress and health. Joining us today is Dr. Douglas Kunzweiler, Mountain Pacific Quality Health's Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Kunzweiler, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So people typically know when they feel stress, and what that means is different for all of us. We might say we're stressed out or we're feeling stressed, but we all react to and handle stress differently. So is it possible to actually define what stress is?
Yeah, it is actually. I think most people would say that stress is the way our body and our mind reacts to some emotion, typically a negative emotion like anger or certainly fear, frustration, or sadness. It's the way our bodies and our minds are programmed to react.
Can you tell us a little bit about what physically and maybe chemically happens to a person during a stress response?
Sure. It's a hormonal response primarily. When we are confronted with a danger or a situation that we are uncomfortable with, our bodies secrete some hormones. Chief among them is adrenaline, also cortisol, and some other minor ones. And they cause changes in the way our bodies act. They increase heart rate, they raise our blood pressure, they increase muscle tension, they make our pupils dilate. And so it's a variety of things, but it's primarily driven by hormones.
So you've talked a little bit about some of the common symptoms when we're feeling a stress response, and some don't sound particularly healthy, but are there times when stress is actually good for you?
Yes, we think that from an evolutionary standpoint, this response was designed to help us deal with danger. The classic fight or flight response, and that when you're confronted with danger, it was advantageous to have your body's muscle systems performing at their top so that you could either run away and escape the danger or fight it off. And so all these changes that we go through are adaptive, and they've helped us survive over the eons.
That makes sense. So are there reasons why people react to stress differently?
Sure. Some of it I think is your basic, underlying personality, but it's also true that people who are confronted with stress a lot learn to adapt to it, they learn to manage it, and the more you are exposed to it, especially in terms of danger, if you think about soldiers or surgeons, people who have to deal with stressful situations all the time, they become accustomed to it, their bodies adapt to it, their minds adapt to it, and they learn how to manage it better. But pretty much everybody feels it.
So is age a factor in how we manage stress?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. Is age a factor in how we manage stress?
Yeah, you don't hear as well when you get older. No, I think it is. And as we get older, our bodies in general are not as resilient as they used to be. And also as you get older, you tend to have more chronic diseases like high blood pressure and heart disease and so forth. And all of these things, stress impacts harder than it does when you're younger. It just makes it harder to deal with.
What about gender, Dr. Kunzweiler? So between male and female, are there symptoms of stress differently?
Yeah, the basic response is the same no matter what your gender is, but I think there's some cultural things that go on. Males are brought up to ignore it and to pretend as though it didn't happen. I think women are a lot more attuned to stress and not as often try to hide it the way men do. But our bodies react pretty much the same way.
So are there differences between acute and chronic stress? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, acute stress, the best way to think about that is, if you're confronted with a sudden danger, like maybe when you're driving or you're walking in the street and you're confronted by some danger, and you immediately feel your heart rate increase, you feel your muscles tense up, your attention gets, focused very sharply on the danger. And this tends to go away fairly quickly then once the danger is gone. Chronic stress, the symptoms are more subtle. You might undergo things like abdominal distress, like belly pain. Headache is a common thing, muscle tension, muscle aches, fatigue, feeling depressed, more subtle symptoms, not quite as prominent as with acute stress.
If someone is dealing with chronic stress, then what are the possible long-term effects of some of those things that you did mention?
Well, we know that it aggravates certain conditions, certainly high blood pressure. That can lead to heart disease, coronary artery disease. It can lead to rhythm disturbance in the heart. We know that it causes a lot of chronic gastrointestinal symptoms, chronic abdominal pain, cramping, bloating, can be associated with diarrhea or with constipation. And we know that it can affect the brain. It can make depression worse. It can make anxiety worse, can interfere with memory. So it has quite a variety of effects on our entire body.
Great. Well, we need to pause here for a quick break. And when we come back, Dr. Kunzweiler is going to dive a little bit deeper into how stress affects our health. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here with Dr. Kunzweiler talking about stress and health. And when stress goes unchecked, it can definitely cause serious health problems or worsen health issues you may already have. Welcome back, Dr. Kunzweiler.
Thank you.
So people who regularly feel the effects of stress are often at a higher risk for heart disease. How are stress and heart health connected?
Well, some of the hormones that are released under stress have direct effects on the heart. They increase your heart rate, they increase blood pressure, and this makes the heart have to work harder. It has to pump against that higher pressure, and it can also interfere with the heart rhythm. There's a rhythm disturbance called atrial fibrillation that we know is exacerbated by chronic stress.
So more than 34 million people in the United States have diabetes. Can stress actually cause diabetes?
Yes, it can. It's not a direct cause, we don't believe, but it certainly makes it worse. Some of the symptoms of chronic stress include things like poor diet, poor dietary habits. Sometimes people will overeat to make themselves feel better to help relieve the stress. That contributes to type 2 diabetes. One of the stress hormones that's released is cortisol, and that also raises your blood sugar, which can be helpful in a fight or flight situation, but it does aggravate type 2 diabetes. So stress, although it's not a direct cause, it certainly can make it worse.
Okay, I want to talk to you about some of the mental effects of stress. But first, let's talk about how stress physically affects the brain. What does stress, especially chronic stress, do to your brain?
Well, it has a number of effects. When you're undergoing stress, your brain is sort of focusing on those negative feelings and on those things that are causing the stress. And this leads to a sense of chronic fatigue, tiredness. And it also leads to a sense of futility and frustration, and it can lead to depression or chronic anxiety, and those two often go hand in hand. So stress can lead to depression. It can also interfere with your memory, and it sort of keeps you from being in the moment and enjoying the good things about life.
So you just mentioned briefly stress and memory. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how stress and memory are connected?
Yeah, our memory works by focusing on something and then sort of repeating it to ourselves. When you are under stress, you tend to focus more on those negative emotions, whatever it is that's causing your stress, and you have a harder time focusing on things that you would like to remember. For instance, somebody's name that you've just been introduced to, or remembering some part of your schedule that you need to attend to. You tend to get distracted more when you're under stress. You're focusing on these negative emotions and you're not paying attention to the things that you should.
Can stress lead to dementia?
I don't think there's any evidence that it causes dementia. Dementia is a sort of a term that covers several specific types. And we don't really know a whole lot at this point about what causes dementia, but I don't know of any research that says that chronic stress causes dementia itself. However, it certainly interferes with memory. Memory loss is a part of dementia. And so chronic stress can certainly make the situation worse.
So we know that chronic stress can lead to anxiety, and I think some people think that those are basically the same thing. Could you explain the difference between the two?
Anxiety typically is a sort of unfocused fear, and certainly that can be part of stress. But stress can also encompass more than just anxiety. It can be a result of anger. It can be a result of frustration. It can be a result of sadness. It doesn't necessarily have to involve anxiety. So anxiety can be a part of chronic stress, but they're slightly different.
Many of us have probably heard that stress can cause an increase in appetite, an increase in stress, what we call stress eating, and lead to overeating and weight gain. Why do people stress eat?
Yeah, eating, especially eating things like high sugar foods releases endorphins, and endorphins are the feel-good hormones that make us feel more relaxed and sort of mildly euphoric. And so some people, to combat stress, to help relieve stress, they eat, and particularly they eat things that are high in sugar content or carbohydrate content that tend to make them feel better, at least in the short term.
So on the other side of the coin, there are those who have a decreased appetite related to stress. And so why do some people turn to food and others turn away from it?
Well, as I said, our gut seems to be wired to our brain, and so the two interact a lot. So some people, when they're feeling stressed, they have abdominal pain, they might even have nausea, and that tends to inhibit their appetite. You can also see stress as a part of an eating disorder. People who have anorexia or who have a body dysmorphic disorder where they feel like their body is never quite perfect, and in order to try and control that, they will control their eating and actually sort of starve themselves. So it can play into that and be a part of that whole syndrome.
Thank you. We're going to pause for a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about healthy stress management. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. We've talked about the bad news when it comes to stress, but there is good news. Learning how to manage stress can have positive effects on your body. Dr. Kunzweiler is still with us. So to learn how to manage stress, we probably need to first talk about stress triggers. And when we talk about a stress trigger, what are some of the common stressors we're talking about, Dr. Kunzweiler?
Well, any life change would be a common stressor. Even things that we might think of as good changes, for instance, moving to a new location, marriage, having a new baby, those are things we generally think of as being good things, but they all trigger stress. And then, of course, bad things, having trouble at work, maybe trouble with coworkers or a supervisor. Money problems are always a great source of stress. Ill health, worrying about health, or having a health condition is a great source of stress to many people. Raising children, those are some of the main triggers.
Can you prevent stress?
No, you can't really prevent it. As we talked about before, our bodies are programmed to release these hormones, and they have their effect. So you can't really prevent it, but you can learn to manage it.
Are stress management and relieving stress considered the same thing then?
Not necessarily. When I think of it, I think of stress management as being a good, healthy way to control stress. Sometimes what people do to relieve stress is not particularly healthy. We talked about maybe binge eating is something that gives you some temporary relief. Other things are alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, other drugs, amphetamines. People use these to relieve stress, and they do work in the short term to a certain extent, but they're not particularly healthy ways to relieve stress.
That's good information. Let's talk about acute stress. Can you talk about how folks can manage stress in the moment that they are actually feeling stressed?
Yeah, acute stress, like especially in reaction to danger, is difficult. It's easy to say things like, well, pay attention to your breathing, control your breathing, maybe recite a mantra to yourself to help calm yourself down. And those are things that certainly you can learn to do. And if you are exposed to acute stress, on some sort of repetitive basis, people do find these kinds of techniques and they are able to use them. But our bodies are built to react pretty quickly to danger, and it's not always easy to control that.
What about stress management over time? So what can you do to manage stress over time?
Like anything else, you have to actually sit down and pay attention to the problem. And so it's good to take some time, sit down and think about your triggers. What are your stressors? Even write them down and try and pay attention to why they're causing you to feel the way they do. And then try and figure out what things you could actually change. And you might not be able to change everything in your life, but oftentimes, if, for instance, there's something going on at work that's stressing you, if you just let it go on, then the stress is really managing you. But if you sit down and put some thought into it and think about possible changes you could make, maybe you could go to a supervisor and talk to them. Maybe you could work to have yourself transferred somewhere else. Maybe you could look for training so that you could find a new job. There are always positive things that you can do. And so that's helpful. It's helpful to eat a healthy diet, to get a good amount of rest, and it's helpful to exercise.
And that leads me to my next question. Exercise, many of us use that and we feel that does help us relieve stress. How does it work?
When we use our bodies, it releases endorphins, again, those pleasurable hormones, the good hormones, and that helps the body to relax. The fight or flight response, gets our muscles ready to work. That's what it was what its purpose was. And so using your muscles helps to diffuse that fight or flight response. So you release the good feeling hormones and you're able to dissipate the stress hormones, and that just makes you feel more relaxed. And overall, it helps you with things like diet and rest as well. So lots of positive benefits to it.
Thank you. So what about meditation and mindfulness? For those who have never used it or heard of it, can you talk about, one, what it is, and two, would you recommend that?
Yeah, there are lots of different meditation techniques, and you can go on the internet and just Google guided meditation, and there are a lot of helpful things you can find there. But basically, what all meditation has in common is it is a technique that helps you to focus your mind, to stop thinking about the things that are worrying you, that are causing you stress, and just focus your mind and sort of stop thinking for a while. And that has been found to be helpful. It helps to lower blood pressure, it can help to improve depression. So it's worth investigating.
That sounds great. We have time for one last question, Dr. Kunzweiler. So when it comes to managing stress, I think it's important to let folks know when someone should seek medical help.
I'm sorry.
When would it be important for someone to seek medical help regarding their stress?
Oh, seeking medical help. Well, certainly if you are feeling depressed and if you have any thoughts about suicide, then you need to call 911 or call a mental health crisis line. If you are thinking about starting an exercise program to help deal with your stress, it's helpful to go talk to your primary care provider about things that you could do, how to start it, how to progress in it, things that would be safe for you to do. If you are worried that stress is possibly contributing to high blood pressure or to other health problems like diabetes, or if you're having trouble with insomnia, seeing a healthcare provider is a good thing to do.
Thank you, Dr. Kunzweiler. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for joining us this week. Until next time, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.